The pen touches the ledger. A single line of ink crosses out a name. Below it, a new surname appears. The same family, the same address, the same trade. But a different identity now governs their relationship to the state. Inheritance, conscription, taxation, all now flow through this new, simplified form. This was not an accident. It was a process. A quiet, administrative rewriting of lineage that occurred across empires in the 19th century. To understand why, we rewind to the moment states began treating names not as family history, but as infrastructure. The mechanism was paperwork. Passports, census schedules, and property deeds. The 19th century saw the rise of the administrative state, an entity obsessed with legibility. Its motive was control, achieved through efficiency. A state cannot tax what it cannot find. It cannot conscript soldiers whose lineages are obscured by patronymics and regional variations. The pattern is one of reduction. Long, complex names were collapsed into short, state-legible forms. Multiple spellings of the same family name were standardized into a single official version. This modernization explains many changes. A name like Ivanov Sin Petrovich becomes simply Ivanov. Similarly, a compound surname such as Petrov Voskresensky might be flattened to the simpler Petrov. But the critical anomaly appears when we look for the paperwork behind the change. We should find petitions, court notices, annotations in registry margins. Often we find nothing. The old name simply stops, the new one begins. This brings us to the testable hypothesis. If a civilization or a significant cultural layer was administratively omitted, the signature would be this: discontinuity without documentation. Synchronized omissions across different empires, targeting similar naming conventions without the expected bureaucratic trail. To test this, we compare sequential records. A census from 1850, a tax roll from 1855, a military conscription list from 1860. We look for the same household using identifiers beyond the surname, the address, the patriarch's first name and age, the family trade. When the surname changes between documents, but every other identifier remains constant, we have found a point of investigation. Modernization explains the change. It does not automatically explain the coordinated silence. The question is not whether names were changed. They were, for clear administrative reasons. The question is whether, within that massive global project of standardization, certain specific lineages were systematically severed from their past. The first case study takes us to the Russian Empire, where identity became a paper trap. But what exactly made this paper trap so effective, and how did it ensnare entire lineages without leaving a trace? The Russian internal passport system, fully codified in the early 19th century, turned a name into a credential. It was no longer a description of lineage, it was a state-issued key for mobility. A subject wishing to travel outside their district required a passport. The local police or administrative office issued it, and in that moment of issuance, a subtle transformation could occur. The official tasked with writing the document might transliterate a surname to fit Cyrillic orthographic standards. He might simplify a complex patronymic-derived name, or, if the name sounded foreign or politically inconvenient, if it bore the markers of a Tatar or Tartarian origin, he might substitute it entirely with a more common Russian-sounding equivalent. The individual had little recourse. The passport was the reality. The name inscribed upon it was their legal identity. The evidence for this is found in the dissonance between different record sets. Revision lists, which recorded tax-paying populations, show one surname for a family. Yet, the police passport registers for the same district from the same year show a different surname for individuals from that same family. For instance, A family in the Caucasus might be recorded as Tartakov in an 1850 census but appear as Tarasov in an 1862 military draft list with the same address and family structure. The metric books from the local church might record a baptism under the old name, while a conscription roll lists the young man under the new. The high friction points for these changes are clear. The borderlands, multilingual provinces like the Caucasus or Ukraine, and the Great Migration to urban centers like Moscow or St. Petersburg. It was at these administrative frontiers that identities were most fluid. What stands out is not the change itself, but the continuity around it. Families that kept the same land, the same trade, the same village address, but somehow became a new surname within the same district. There is no recorded petition for a name change, no court order. The paper trail for the transition is missing. This is where we introduce limited, clearly labeled speculation. If identifiers linked to a Tatar or Tartarian heritage were administratively inconvenient or politically sensitive during a period of intense Russification, then substitution becomes a quiet, scalable solution. The system didn't need to erase people from existence. It only needed to make their original, culturally significant identifiers unsearchable in the official archives that would be used by future generations. The viewer's takeaway is methodological. When you trace a lineage, look for the moment the name changes, but pay closer attention to everything that stays the same. The witnesses at a wedding, the neighbors on a property deed, the trade listed on a census. The identity was rewritten, but the people and their lives persisted. This Russian case alone is compelling, but the true scale of the phenomenon emerges when we see the same pattern replicated across rival empires. The question is, how could such coordination occur without explicit agreement? If the phenomenon were isolated to the Russian Empire, it could be dismissed as a peculiarity of Tsarist bureaucracy. But the pattern repeats with unsettling similarity in two other sprawling multi-ethnic empires, Austro-Hungary and the Ottomans. This parallel outcome is the core of the evidentiary pattern. The Austro-Hungarian bureaucracy faced a monumental challenge, governing a patchwork of languages, ethnicities, and historical legal systems. Its solution was harmonization. From the mid-19th century onward, a push for administrative rationalization swept through the empire. Census methods were standardized, regional legal codes were brought into alignment, and crucially, civil registries began to overwrite parish records. This was the moment of compression. A Hungarian surname with complex suffixes might be shortened. A Slavic patronymic might be transformed into a fixed German-sounding surname. The key anomaly here is timing. The changes are abrupt. They align precisely with the dates of administrative reforms, 1867, 1880, 1890, rather than with natural family events like marriage or adoption. A family name that remained consistent for generations in local parish books suddenly appears in a new, standardized form in the first imperial civil registry, with no explanatory footnote. Yet, this administrative harmonization raises a deeper question. Why were names with specific linguistic roots, particularly those associated with Tatar heritage, the ones most frequently replaced, while other ethnic identities were largely preserved? The Ottoman case is perhaps the most revealing. For centuries, the empire's millet system allowed diverse communities, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, to maintain distinct identities, including naming conventions. This tolerance makes the subsequent change more significant. During the Tanzimat reforms of the mid to late 1800s and accelerating under the Young Turks, the state intensified its direct administration of the population. New civil codes, conscription laws, and property registration systems required fixed, legible identities. And in this process, records of families with names bearing Tatar or Tartarian linguistic roots become sparse. Not absent, but sparse. When they do appear in later records, it is often with a note that a new surname was adopted under the reforms. The old names simply fade from the official record. The critical contrast is this. Other ethnic groups largely maintained their naming heritage within the Ottoman system. Why were Tatar-associated names targeted for this quiet administrative replacement? The official explanation of modernization struggles here. It cannot explain the selectivity. This parallel outcome across three different empires, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, points to a broader global pattern of the 19th century. States were compressing human identity into categories they could more easily govern. The speculation, clearly labeled, is that this global administrative impulse may have provided the perfect cover for the systematic omission of a specific heritage. The practical test for a viewer researching their own lineage is now clear. Trace a single family line across three different types of documents from the same era: a census, a tax record, a property deed. When the surname changes, scrutinize the context. Do the witnesses remain the same? Does the family's address persist? Do their occupations hold steady? The discontinuity in the name, set against the continuity of life, is the archival clue. It returns us to the central, haunting question raised by these parallel outcomes. If names were replaced at this scale and with this coordination, what does a descendant do with the uncertainty it creates about their true bloodline connections to the past? A surname became a state-issued interface between a person and power. The omission itself is the archival clue. It creates an inheritance of uncertainty, staring at a stranger in a census record who carries your blood but not your name. We don't just look at history, we look at the gaps left behind. Subscribe to join us as we dig into the next archival omission.